not getting the media here. Huh. I don't know why we... Good evening, everybody. This is Jonathan Ginsberg. Hope you are all doing well. As you can see, I have a semi-regular guest with me, Stephanie Joy, who is an attorney also, and her pet. What kind of bird is that?
Amazon.
Amazon was like a parakeet?
A parrot.
Parrot.
No,
Okay.
parrot.
Parrot. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
am I even saying the name right? Because we got a couple.
we will not be getting
that's Tasha.
any discussion of Social Security disability from the parrot, but we will get it from Stephanie. And I hope everybody's doing well. It is March 11th, 2026. It was actually like 80 degrees here. How is the weather in Pennsylvania?
Right now it's rainy, but it has been like 80 the last couple days. And then even a couple hours west, where my husband is by Harrisburg, they had tornado watch.
Wow.
So he said it was crazy.
Yeah, they're supposed to get cooler here tomorrow with rain, and then it's going to be maybe in the 70s this weekend, which I've got my first competitive tennis match of the season of the spring season. So I'm playing on Saturday. So hopefully the weather will cooperate. It'll be the early low 70s and very comfortable. So we'll see. We picked up a couple of players that were at a higher team, so they moved us up dramatically. So we're going to see what happens. It's going to be interesting when they start. So
you should videotape it, pop it up.
Yeah, well, I don't know if anybody's ready to see me playing tennis at this point.
It'd be fun.
So I know one thing we were just chatting about before we went on is AI, and just briefly, I mean, I know I'm using AI to do to look at medical records and to kind of draft briefs. I think you're doing the same thing. Have you found that to be a worthwhile endeavor, using some of these AI tools that are out there?
I do, because some of the things that would take a really long time, like even putting things in order, you could be cutting and pasting your lines in a Word document. Oh, I have to rearrange that. So this is up, and it just goes much faster. So it takes a lot of the boring stuff out. Like, a lot of the real mind numbing stuff.
Yeah. And I think Social Security is using, from what I understand, from people that, recently were working there, they're using more of it as well. And I think that's just a trend to come. And one of the things, just to make sure everybody realizes, the AI tools that we're using are the paid versions, which means that the privacy is maintained. So we're not putting stuff out there on the internet for the world to see. So anyway, but yeah, it's been a very, very useful tool. And I think that it's something we're just going to see more and more of. And it wouldn't surprise me that 5-10 years from now, AI will be a big part of how Social Security makes decisions. We'll deal with that when it comes, but I think that's kind of where we're headed, because it's just it's technology that's just becoming more and more prevalent in pretty much everything you do. So that is my thought.
If it leans the right way.
Yeah. We just have to.
It's our way.
Tool, like anything else, it's a tool. I mean, you can't just have it draft something and just put it out there, because we've both discovered that it will it'll cite the wrong page on something, or it'll say something that the actual record does not say.
Everything's got to be proofread. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
What it
There's
does,
something called the hallucinations we were talking about. Hallucinations.
And realize that when we write our briefs, there's a certain format. Social Security uses something called a 5-step sequential evaluation process to evaluate claims. When you write your brief, you go through that. And some of those steps usually are fairly straightforward. You don't need to spend a lot of time with it. For example, step 1 is the person now working? Well, if you look at the earnings record and you see 0 earnings for 2023, and they say they became disabled in December of 22, then that's and the state agency has decided or recognized they're not working. You don't have to spend a lot of time on that. So the AI tool will basically say, there's no earnings. Step one is satisfied. And step two, again, it's something a lot of times from the state agency. Step three, many times people don't meet a listing. That's step three. So you can just get rid of that very quickly. So it's just a way to kind of get through some of the, like you said, form stuff that you have to deal with, but it just gets through it a lot quicker, and it gives you the structure. That's what I really like about it. It gives you the structure based on your version of a brief and your style or my style, and it gives you the structure, which I think is very, very useful. And quite frankly, I think that people out there who are thinking about applying for disability, there's nothing wrong at all with putting in information about your case, anonymously, and saying, what do you think Social Security would do with this? That's not saying it's going to give you an 100% answer, but it might give you an idea of what to do. So there's always want people to use that tool as well. Something that's part of our reality.
Is your sound going back? Is your sound going off?
I mean,
Now I hear you better.
I'm hearing you fine. I don't know if there's a
just
problem.
For a second.
For a second there, I went a little.
I was going to add too, and it might be helpful for people to know. A lot of attorneys don't even do briefs for their cases. They're not mandatory. It's not like a motion brief in state court where it's absolutely mandatory and has to be in an exact format. It's a very different world. And I don't know, Jonathan, what the percentages are, but I wouldn't be surprised if less than half do briefs.
Yeah, I do them almost every single case. I had one that I did not, and the reason for it was a very straightforward issue, and I felt like it was better to do an opening statement than a brief, and that's just a strategic decision on my part, because I felt like the brief might take away from my argument as opposed to enhance it. But normally a brief is good. And actually, one of the things that we both have observed, Regina Carpenter, who's a retired judge who's done some seminars through NOSCR, and she made a very interesting point in her last presentation, which I knew you were on as well, and I've consulted with her, that even if you do a brief, you can still do a brief opening where you kind of highlight the things that are most relevant. What your argument is, was the person meet a grid rule, are there certain pieces of evidence that are particularly important? So I'm starting to do more of that, as opposed to just saying, yes, I submitted a brief, it's Exhibit 20E, and I'll stick with that. Because I realized one of the reasons I do them, I started doing them on almost every case, is, personal things. That is not a.
Keep talking. I can hear you.
Yeah. That is not a parakeet, folks. Unless that parakeet knows how to mimic dogs. But you find that when you okay, when you have a brief out there, it saves a lot of time, because since COVID, judges are running these hearings virtually, and they'll allocate 30 to 45 minutes, and you don't want to be spending 7 or 8 minutes, which is could be 10-12% of your time, giving an opening statement if you can do it in a brief. And I think that judges also appreciate it because it spells out your argument very clearly. They can look at it ahead of time. It basically sends a message that you're prepared. I think there's just a lot of reasons to do it. And yeah, I don't know how many people do them, but I like to do them, and I like to put some effort into it. There are services that will create them. I've never been all that impressed with those kind of these very formulaic briefs. So
I was hoping for it, but nothing.
No free lunches.
Close to what I would require.
Yeah. All right, let's get some questions. We'll kind of return to this over time. All right, so Shub, hadn't seen him in a while, but he's a regular over the past 6-8 months. 57 years old with a diary date in 5 to 7 years. Total knee replacement on both knees. If he had one, would he be expected to return to commercial driving at 62? I think that's, again, a case-by-case thing, but I suspect that, even if you have knee replacements, your recovery might be good, but it may not be enough that would allow you to return to, full-time driving. And I think ultimately it boils down to, would a doctor say, a treating doctor in particular, say that, yes, you can do certain things, but you probably shouldn't do things that put a lot of stress on your knees. Example, and this is kind of a silly example, but I've had friends. I played basketball in the men's league for many, many years. Probably too long. Got to the point I was not really helping anybody. But I have a couple of friends who had knee replacements, and they wanted to go back to play basketball, and their doctor said, "Look, you can do that, but you're going to shorten the life of that knee replacement. So where you may get 15 or 20 years out of it, you may shorten it to 7 or 8 years. And the problem you run into is, if your knee, the knee replacement goes bad, when you're 65 or 70, you may not be able to get a doctor, insurance to cover it. So my feeling is it's going to depend on what the doctor says, but at the end of the day, it's probably not likely that a doctor is going to want you to do something that's going to be really stressful on your knees. And I suspect that commercial driving is something that's going to be, because there's lifting involved in it, and there's, obviously sitting with your knee in one position. Would you agree with me on that?
I would, but also just a technical point, that commercial driving would not be part of his past relevant work at his CDR because it would be outside the 5 years.
Right.
So he'd be relegated to unskilled work only, and then he would still grid out.
Yeah.
So
And,
unless his grid suddenly he's, suddenly he can do, he's improved enough to do medium level work.
Right. And what we're talking about here, just to clarify this, is Social Security uses a concept called past relevant work. And that is, the work you've done in the past. It used to be a 15-year look back. And a few years ago, they changed it to a 5-year look back. So Shub, has been approved. And let's say he gets a review in 4 years. Well, the look back, the 5-year look back from the time of that review is going to be, there's no work in the 5-year look back period. So even though he was a truck driver, for Social Security purposes, he has no past relevant work, if that makes any sense. Even though he maybe did it for 15 or 20 years, if nothing in the last 5 years, there is no past relevant work. If you look at the grid rule, and the grid rule in particular 202.06 says, if you're limited to light work and you have no past relevant work, you are disabled under the grid rule. So even if he has capacity for light work, it doesn't matter that he could go, it doesn't matter what anybody says about the commercial driving. The only way he could be found not disabled under a CDR would be if he could do what they call medium work, which is lifting 25 pounds frequently, 50 pounds on occasion, and standing 6 hours a day. And I think that's just not very likely on A, because of age, and B, because of the knee issues. So that's a very good point that he would meet the grid. And, the point here is that when you look at a grid rule analysis, in a CDR, it's as of the date of the CDR, not of the original decision. So that's a very good point. Yeah, I think he would meet the grid, and that's not really relevant because he has no past relevant work. And it's a crazy concept because you think, okay, I did all this work for all these years. And again, it benefits.
It's a beautiful concept. It's beautiful.
And I've had a lot of cases, you probably have as well, where because these things take so long that at the time the person filed an application for disability and the state agency did a look back, at that time, 2 years ago, they had past work within the 5 years prior to that date. Now we're 2 years down later, now we're in 2026, the person applied in 2021, they last worked in 2020, there's no past relevant work. The state agency found that this person, is 55 or 56 and is limited to light work. By definition, they're basically saying they're disabled. Now you're going to have a judge decide they could do medium work, which is just not really that likely.
Which is a stretch.
Yeah, it's pretty rare, wouldn't you say, to find a person over 55 that a judge would find they could do medium work. I mean, I guess it happens, but it seems pretty rare.
I had it with one, and it was a really sympathetic character, but he was his own worst enemy. Wouldn't get treatment.
Yeah.
Had a substance abuse problem. And I mean, like huffing. It was strange, but it was sad because I know he couldn't. I knew in my gut that he would not be able to sustain, work. But because his past work was medium, it was like painting and stuff like that, outdoor stuff, and I couldn't get him to go to the. But for the fact that it was from something near my hometown area, I probably wouldn't have, if the person doesn't cooperate at least that much, I'm not going to stick with it. It's one of the few times I would ever withdraw something like that, and I couldn't really do it. So I just gave it my all, and it just didn't work.
Didn't work.
I
had an interesting case not too long ago where my client, and you talk about, I hate to use the word their own worst enemy, but when we prepare a case, where I'm sure when you do your pre-hearing calls, you tell your clients, you've got to give an answer. You don't want to say it depends or not very much or not. So the judge asked the question, how much can you lift? And I told my client, I said, you want to say, and we talked about it. I said, how much do you think a gallon of milk's 8 pounds? Can you do that? Well, that would be a stretch, but I could possibly do it. I said, well, with 5 pounds? Yeah, I could probably do 5 pounds. So the judge says, how much can you lift? He says 0. Well, you can sort of see the judge, as an audio hearing, but you can sort of hear the judge take a breath and he goes, 0? You're meaning to tell me you couldn't lift a file folder of papers that is, less than a pound? Nope, can't lift anything. The judge asked him like 3 or 4 times, because I'm giving you an opportunity to tell me how much you can lift. And finally he said, well, maybe I could do 10 pounds. I mean, it didn't make any sense. And the judge obviously found him not credible and denied the case. And part of the reason of the denial was, that, he didn't answer these questions with any kind of consistency. It just didn't make any sense. So you don't want to overstate what you can do, but you don't want to understate it. You don't want to say, I have pain at level 10, 24/7, because that just doesn't make sense. You'd be in the emergency room. You don't want to say, I can't lift anything. Even to say I can only lift 2 pounds.
As he's probably holding his cell phone in his hand when he says it,
Right. So, generally speaking, if someone is telling me, a gallon of milk is a problem, then okay, that's maybe a 5 pound lifting. And maybe there are people who literally can't lift 5 pounds. It's just not that much. I mean, it really, I think most judges are going to find that really hard to believe they can't do even 5 pounds. So, and the other point of it I make to my clients is, when you talk about what you can do, whether it's lifting or standing or sitting, you got to pick a day. You don't want to say, well, it depends on the day, because that doesn't help the judge. Judge is creating a hypothetical question for the vocational witness. So what I tell my clients is, imagine, a day, a 1 is like the, terrible day. You'd be in bed all day. A 10, you'd be out there mowing the grass. And, maybe you have a 10, a really, really good day once every couple of months. But most of the time, you're going to range between a 3 and a 6. So pick a 4. Pick a day that's a 4, 4.5. Not quite in the middle, but maybe a little bit less than halfway, and talk about what you could do. But give the judge an answer. You have to. I mean, judges don't want to have to fight you to get an answer. So you got to give them an answer. You can lift, and just you have to pick a number. I mean, I know it's going to depend, but pick a number.
Hard.
10 pounds? Is it, I can stand for 20 minutes. I can stand for, I have to rest for 15 or 20 minutes. You just have to give answers. And one of the things that I do, I'm sure you do the same thing, is we just go over, let's come up with an answer to this. And I realize that every day is going to be a little bit
almost
different.
like an example. So it can be like
Yeah.
in your head, that you remember what you're able to do.
Yeah. Because realize that, you're thinking about your life as it exists over the last, 2-3 years since your medical condition got bad. And there's going to be ups and downs. Some days the meds work, some days they don't. The judges comes up once a profile of an average day. And that average day may be, maybe you don't have that particular day, but you got to come up with something so the judge can make it a hypothetical. Because if you don't do it, they're going to assume. I always tell people, if you don't give the judge an answer, they're going to assume more capacity.
Because I think then he's probably going to jump on what the DDE said. He'll just be like, all right, well, he's not even refuting what the DDE said, which found him not disabled. But you know what I do, Jonathan? I don't really have a problem with saying it depends if they explain what it depends upon. Like if they say, well, I have good days and bad days, because I think that's kind of important to say, because most people do. And how many days a week are bad, I'll usually ask them that, to get that out. And they'll say, well, 4 or 5 are bad, but I get like, 2 or 3 good days. Okay, so on your bad days, the majority of your days, what would you say? Could you, how far could you walk? Would you be going to the store that day grocery shopping, or would that be only on the other days? Or, and like you said, we've done, hearing prep for, anywhere from like 1 to 3 hours within days before the hearing. So, they kind of have some idea. Yeah. I mean, some people get really nervous. Well, everybody gets nervous, but, and they kind of sometimes don't remember the things we went over, but you can usually, we're allowed to do a little bit of leading a little bit because they know that people are just like, but you know what I wanted to say too, when we were talking about past relevant work, I just had a case this week where the person's past relevant work period There was only, so it was like 5 days in the month of January, say, 2019, and the DLI was 2023. The past relevant work period was end of 2018,
Yep.
and
Yeah,
they had
because
just tipped over into the 5 years.
let's explain that so that people understand. When I said it's 5 years from the date of your hearing, if your date last insured
Usually,
is already passed, let's say it's in 2023, it's 5 years prior to the date last insured. So it's not always 5 years from the date of the hearing. So go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want to make sure.
yeah. Well, I ended up making the argument, and I was hashing this out, trying to get all sorts of unique arguments and stuff, because I really didn't want this sedentary skill job in there. If we could get it out, it turned out, when I was looking at like the detailed earnings and stuff, she only made, apparently she had 3 shifts in that last month.
Yeah.
And the whole month was less than SGA. She was actually a part-time person at that point, but just made enough to be over SGA. And I think the argument went over pretty well with the judge, because I was like, I never actually saw something in writing about, well, if that last month they only worked half the month and it was less than SGA, that month doesn't have to count. That was a pivotal answer to whether there would be any past relevant work. None. Or I have to fight this battle with this sedentary skill job.
Couldn't you also argue, and I've made this argument before as well, that if, let's say that there was, a skilled job and it was in the last 3 months of that 5-year look back. Okay. So in other words, let's say that the look back is going back to 2000, now we're in June of 26. It's going back to, what are we in March?
Almost.
March of 20. Okay. So let's say that they had a skilled job, and the skilled job ended in, let's say, went from February or January, February, March of 2021. Could you not argue that the 3 months they had the skilled job, that it takes 6 months to a year to develop the skills to do a skilled job, and since they only did it for 3 months, even though they had done it before then, but the look back is only for that 5 years, that 3 months is not enough to qualify them to do skilled work?
I have not done that because I don't think it would work, but I mean, it's an interesting thought. I've thought about it, but I was like, I don't know.
It's worth a shot. I mean, I've used it because the thing is, if you think about the logic is the reason why they changed it to 5 years, look back, is that so many jobs have changed. A job that somebody did 15 years ago, which is not, not going to be the same job as someone did now. So 2011 or whatever, that's not going to be the same job. So if you're looking at 5 years going back and the last 3 months were skilled, what's to say that those skills in that last 3 months, are enough to qualify that person to do that job going forward? So I've made that argument successfully.
And the judge put it in his hearing, or you just won the case?
I mean, I've won those cases. Now, again, if I'm not mistaken, the judge did include that in the decision. But my point is,
cool.
I put it in a brief if I see that, to get rid of skilled work, because we want to basically show there's no.
Yeah, we do.
I think.
I think you can also make a rebuttal argument when that is going to be a skilled job to show, like, you could probably do some research and say they don't even use the same software anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what I mean? And I just don't know if they would say, yes, but within the past 5 years, they did use that software because she was using it.
But again, it doesn't help them now. Now, actually, I had I will get back to the questions, but I want to just run this by you, because I got this kind of crazy situation now where I had a hearing a couple of weeks ago. The judge left the record open, and it's closing tomorrow or Friday. And they wanted some additional medical, which we've got in. But when I went back and I made my notes about the hearing, and I looked at it, and the vocational witness, first of all, I would ask the vocational witness questions about, I can't remember what it was, but it was just, maybe, for example, one question I'll sometimes ask is, if a person is 400 pounds, what is the requirement in terms of a chair? Because that would be a special accommodation. I ask questions like that. Well, I don't know. I don't have any idea what percentage of jobs will be limited. I don't know. So anyway, the vocational was not very impressive. So she cited a job for the judge in one of the hypotheticals, and the job does no such DOT number. And she basically says it's, 264.318-014. I looked it up. I ain't no such job. And, she missed one of the digits. So I'm kind of questioning, should I write the judge a post-hearing brief and say, hey, the vocational witness identified a job that does not exist, or should I just kind of keep it in my back pocket that if he turns, I think it's going to be approved, but if he turns it down, I have a grounds for appeal that the vocational witness identified a job that does not exist in the DOT.
Yeah, that is a strategic question. Like, do I just hold on to it and
Yeah.
because I think it's a good case anyway, and
Yeah.
don't put a cog in the judge's wheel, and hopefully it'll, and then you just appeal it anyway. Or it's always a
Well, my concern is if he's thinking about
struggle.
denying it and I do this, he's going to basically want to have another hearing with a different vocational witness and basically ask the same questions. Whereas, I don't know. I'm still kind of debating. My gut tells me just to kind of leave it in my back pocket, but I don't know. I may run it by a couple other people just to see what they think, because it's an interesting quandary. And again, this is another use of AI. Is there's an AI tool, again, it's a paid, controlled one. And I took the hearing audio and I put it in there and it generated a transcript for me, and it referenced this particular DOT code. I just, for fun, I looked it up and it doesn't exist. I went back and listened, and she clearly said 318. It should have been 218. And again, I think that's grounds for appeal. So anyway, it was just an interesting.
Well, that's also a just a thing to point out for everyone who's. I know a lot of people out there are afraid, really concerned about the AI business, right?
Yeah.
And I always try to say, listen, you can't really escape it.
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't. So everyone who uses it just has to be super careful. And it's, we have no control over what other people do, right? But that's the beauty of that. You could literally be looking at, not that you're going to know to do this, or anyone's going to know in the midst of the multitasking you're doing during a hearing, listening and then fabricating your next question while you're listening to the VE, all that stuff. But you can quickly just pop in and look something up if you had to, because we have our information in there and it can find it faster.
Yeah. Well, what I did
code or something.
Yeah, I took. There's a lawyer, pretty well-known lawyer named George Piamonti, who has a column in the Oscar Bulletin every month, and basically it's about vocational witness testimony and so forth. So I literally took all of his columns the last 3 years and put them into a notebook, LM notebook. And so if I have a question about how do I deal with this particular job, pop it in there. It comes back. This is how you deal with it. So, you can do that in real time. And again, it's hard to do because you're trying to listen what's going on, but it can give you some useful ideas as far as that's concerned. Or I'll take an unfavorable decision. And Notebook LM is unique because it is what they call a RAG, which means it's a closed system. And Stephanie and I are both in an AI what do you call it, mastermind group.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of learning about this at the same time. But it's very useful when it's, again, a closed system. You can ask it all kind of questions. It will not go outside what we give it, and it can be very, very, very useful. So anyway, all right. Let's see. We got a couple more. We got somebody says, "Hope we're all well." We are well. Kevin Johnson calls
my
me
cross
and your Goldilocks. There we go. Okay,
Kevin.
I am, and I should be, with everything going well. My daughter is due next week, so I'll be grandpa times 2.
Hopefully
everything
that is
goes.
awesome.
My fully favorable decision is 60. 50 approved by the judge is great. 15%. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe you're saying the judge is a 15% approval rate, which is great to win. And honestly, what I find is that if you have a judge with a very low approval rate, the ones they do approve typically are people over 55. Have you found that?
I don't look up my rates of my judges.
That's right, you don't.
I just don't.
Yeah, I do.
I'm an anti-looker upper.
Because what I do is I will look up the judge. If it's 45% or over, I figure you're going to probably get a fair shot at it. If it's like 30%, 40, low 40s, high 30s or lower, you're going to have a problem. If it's in the 20s, you got a real problem. But I also will go in the NOSCR listserv and I will ask people, what's the deal with this judge? What do they like to do? And you just, you get some useful information. I do it, but I understand why you don't, because you don't want to be going in with the wrong attitude or have your client going with the wrong attitude. I just tell people,
but they look it up, and I'm like,
they
I'm
look
not. It doesn't even matter to me. I go, I'm going to do the 200% job regardless. I don't want to be
yes,
encouraged to give up too early or get overly cocky because I have a
yep,
65%er. Like I just
yeah,
want to
yeah, that's
do a
right.
full job.
That's exactly right. That's exactly. Now, here's a scenario, and I had this happen, and I made a call on it. Maybe it was the wrong call, maybe it was the right call. I had a hearing with a client who is, let's say, we'll just say Pennsylvania. It wasn't Pennsylvania. And the judge was in Charleston, South Carolina, one of the lowest approval judges in the country. And it was a telephone hearing. Okay? The question is, because one of the things she said was, do you consent to a telephone hearing? And I was about that close to telling my client to say, no, I want an in-person. Would you have done that?
For a telephonic?
Yeah. Well, there was the judge. For some reason, they assigned a judge in South Carolina to a claimant who lives in Pennsylvania. So forth. Okay, and this judge has got a 12% approval rate. So the question is, should I have had my client say, "Yeah, I want a live hearing," and then found her somebody in Charleston to do the live hearing, or gone to Charleston? To have gone
Pennsylvania
to do it. I think in the future, if I get that,
maybe.
Yeah, I probably should have
given
done
the
that.
rating.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we appealed it. We got a remand. So if it comes back to that same judge, I think I'm going to do that. Say we want a live hearing, because I don't want this judge again. I don't get these judges who are 15%, 10%. It's just ridiculous, in my opinion. Why are you a judge? I just don't get it. But anyway, all right. Kevin enjoys having us on the live stream. Well, we enjoy doing it. Punta Gorda, Florida. George Graham. A beautiful night. Very nice. Where do you know where Punta Gorda, Florida is? I have no idea where that is.
I think it's in Florida. That's all I need to know.
It's in Florida. You're in Pennsylvania, so this is Florida, so it's warm.
Right. My mom used to live in Florida. But.
Yeah, I'm in Atlanta, so we vacation. We'll go to. When I was a little kid, we'd go to Miami, we always thought Miami was Florida. Of course, Florida's a big state. Now a lot of times we'll go to the Panhandle region, Seaside, Panama City, that area, which is very nice as well. Can you ask questions? Yes, you can. That's what we're here to do. If you work for a government agency, can SSA get your attendance records or just general work history? I assume they could. I mean, normally that would be something that you would want to get for them or to request, because it would presumably show you had problems with attendance and reliability, since that's the main issue. But I don't know that they get that as a matter of course. They're going to get medical records, but normally not attendance.
Yeah, Chrissy, I've never seen them reach out like that for something like that. They're not going to do more than they kind of have to do.
That can help you. I mean, if anything, that's going to help you, because
if you've had bad attendance.
Yeah, I mean, if you have good attendance for the time you stop, that doesn't really do anything. It just means you had good attendance for the time you stopped, and you got to prove that you couldn't maintain the job. But if you had poor attendance, or a lot of leaving early, or coming in late, or write-ups and things like that, that's going to help you. So they're not going to do anything that's going to help you. But that would be something that, as an attorney, we might try to get, because it benefits our client to show that they were having trouble with performance or attendance for the last 5 or 6 months, let's say.
I often have my clients, if they were having a lot of sick days and a lot of outs, I always ask them to hey, can you get your pay stubs?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes we need them otherwise for 820s or 821s, but because that will show which part of that paycheck was, they might have the full paycheck, but it'll show which ones are sick days. Sometimes they took personal days or vacation because they weren't feeling well. And it's something that it can later be pointed to, as this is growing, the need to not work. And it was reflective because, we often bring up at a hearing off task and absenteeism.
Yep. Well, and also be aware, this comes up a lot. People will stop working. Let's say they stop working November 15th of 2025, but they show income in December and January. Well, that's accrued sick time or leave, or it could be a severance package. you want to make sure that's documented. You want to make sure if you had a severance package, you get that information, you get it to your lawyer, and you get that in, because judges are going to see those earnings after onset, and they're going to want an explanation. And some judges, you just tell them, and they'll, okay, I can see that. Others want to see documentation. So I think to take that issue off the table, and again, for purposes of a brief, I want to, if I have earnings after onset, I want to explain that, because you're going to need to explain it, right? That's something that you can't.
And they, a lot of times they can, you guys can get that information from the W-2 or the 1099 it was paid on.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll be checked in that box that, like, they have little boxes that'll say, you could tell it's disability and it's not, or severance or whatever, and it's not regular wages, even though it's taxed as regular wages. It'll have that little box. So that's pretty much, they'll take that pretty conclusively.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, and you can always ask your employer, HR, after the fact, to send you another one or something. Another way was, a lot of times those things, like if it's a severance, it'll come with a cover letter sometimes saying what it was. Like, here's your so-and-so. Or if it might be on the check, if you can get a copy of the check you negotiated, if it was a paper check. But I think nowadays it's probably mostly direct deposit, and maybe you get a letter.
And there should be a pay advice someplace they can plug in and get. Now, what do you do? Now, here's a situation that arises sometimes where somebody is laid off, because the company was having problems, business was having problems, and then they alleged, let's say they were laid off on, June 30th of 2024, and they alleged disability July 1 of 2024. You have to be, because if a judge sees you're laid off, the question is going to be, were you really disabled? If you had been laid off a month later, could you have made that month? So how do you deal with that? Or what do you do?
Well, although, is it even really, layoff, is it like a big, massive layoff? Or is
that's
a
good
you
point.
go and they're kind, but it's really because you're not really our strongest worker.
Right. So if you were laid off and just you and maybe one other person were laid off, and not everybody else was, you could make the argument I was laid off, but they did it to get rid of me because I was not coming in enough. But if, let's say, it's a company shuts down, just the whole company goes out of business or moves their operations to, some other city, that's where you have to be able to show that the last 4 or 5 months you were just, hanging on, barely
horrible, And usually
then,
there's some kind of suggestion in the medical records, even though usually when they're working, they can't really robustly get medical treatment like they can once they stop working. But there might be hints, like complaints to their doctor, even their PCP, about the back it's horrible, blah, blah, blah. They may not have gotten a referral yet, but sometimes you can find a nugget in there. And then if right after they're laid off, they're bam, 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 they're really addressing their medical problems, I think that can help, try to point to it.
Well, you could also get a former coworker who observed you, or a supervisor, say, I was there the last 4 or 5 months. Joe was having a really hard time. He was getting help from his coworkers. He told me about how much pain he was. You can just, non-medical evidence can be very useful in that regard as well. My point simply is that if you stop working because of a company-wide layoff or a shutdown, sometimes it makes sense to use an onset date a few months later, so you can show that there's a medical reason. If you're going to use the next day, you sort of have to show that this was kind of building, is my point. And it just, you stuck it out.
Would you start just alleging the onset later, even if the person's like, no, I really was hanging on? Or would you say, okay, then we will put the next. Well, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily come up. You don't have to tell them you were like, I don't think it's necessarily that it was a layoff. If you're saying, because in the one part of the application where it says, did you stop due to your conditions or due to other reasons? And then they check off the one that says both.
Right. Well, I've had judges ask people, why did you leave your job? And, I was laid off or the company shut down. And so the next question is, well, if the company had not shut down, could you have continued? Well, no. And so the obvious question is, well, how were you able to work through June 30th, but you're saying you couldn't have worked after that? And the answer, again, you prepare for this, is the last 3 or 4 months, we kind of knew this was coming. They kind of loosened the standards of what they were requiring because they knew they were going to shut down. I was getting special considerations from the boss. I wanted to stick it out as best I can. I needed the money. They were willing to.
Plus, there might actually be severance and certain benefits for sticking it out to the bitter end.
Yeah.
So
Or
yeah, I mean, there's a
the
lot of
company's business is going down the tubes. So there was much less to do, stuff like that. So yeah,
yeah,
but you have to be prepared. That's the whole point is you don't want to think about
prepared
that the first time when you're in a front of a judge.
when the judge asks you, right?
Yeah, that's going to be hard to do. Okay. All right. Dimple Bellamy from
Hi,
Ohio.
Dimple.
Uh, all right. And Mary Simmons. Good evening. Good evening, Mary Simmons. And we have Dennis. Got short disability report waiting for results. So what Dennis got was the short form CDR, which is like 7 or 8 questions. And my understanding is if you basically answer no, you're not working, you've not been told you're getting better. There's like 7, that it's read by a machine, and they'll just pretty much, if you answer no to all those things, it's probably not going to be going any further than that. Where you get into, I wouldn't say trouble, but where it becomes an issue is if you've tried to work and there's ongoing earnings, a human being is going to look at it to see. So, but yeah, you just got to wait. You got to wait. All right. Dimple says, Tasha, I'm not sure. There must be something we're not aware of. I don't know what that means.
That's the bird. Dimple knows the bird.
Tasha's the bird. Okay, I got you. Okay. I'm missing.
You're forgetting Tasha's name.
Yes. Okay. All right. So Christy tells us it is 90 degrees here. I made fun of Christy's screen name, 4 o'clock lover, and she said my mind was in the gutter side. She said, no, it's just I don't know what it means, but she's in Jacksonville, Florida. Okay.
Hot.
Well, the grandbaby yet? No, I have not had the grandbaby yet. I mean, I've got one 2.5-year-old who's very, very precocious and just a wonderful. It's been awesome. She's great. And then her brother should be hopefully arriving in the next week or so. So that's the
Nothing
plan.
better.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, having 2 is going to be real interesting, but it's the first one is we had a home run. I mean, she's great. She's really, really great.
That's to convince you to have the next one.
Yeah, well, I told my daughter,
your son.
like, okay, you got a really good one. Your daughter,
that happened to us.
And then next one will be a complete nightmare. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so Stephanie Alford says I was approved, but they give me SSI and disability. What may have happened here was I'm just going to take a guess. You applied for disability. Either A, you didn't have enough credits going in, and so they only consider the SSI part because you didn't have enough credits, or they approved you but changed the onset date to after your date last insured. So what I would tell you is if you're still within the 60-day period of getting that approval notice, look to see did they change the onset date. And, it's hard to do to find out what your date last insured is, but because for some reason you can't get your My Social Security statement if you have a pending disability claim, which makes no sense to me. But
you can get the earnings. You just can't. The statement never tells you your date last insured. It only says if you're
true, but you can, if you get it, you can look at it, you can figure it out.
The calculations. Yep.
You can do a calculation. So the question here is, were you ever insured? And, again, you can also, if you get access to the file, if you have an attorney, we can see, on one of those reports when you first became insured, when you're last insured. But that's probably what happened here. So, if they change the onset date, that's when, you got to look to see whether you want to think about appealing it. And maybe so, because I've had a couple.
And I was going to say, so she didn't prevail on SSD. She prevailed on SSI.
Right.
She can appeal just the SSD.
I think if you appeal it, I think you appeal it. I don't think you can appeal partially.
Can you appeal just the one program? You know what I mean? The SSD, not the SSI.
Because the definition of disability is the same.
Medical.
Yeah. So I think if you appeal it.
Although you're just appealing. Yeah.
You're appealing.
Yeah, I mean, I know. Just
you can't appeal just the onset. I wish you could, but
I was just thinking because it's 2 different programs. I am not appealing the SSI funding. I'm only appealing.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think if you're appealing, you're appealing. And look, I mean, I do these analyses all the time. Should we appeal an amended onset date and an administrative approval? And my thought is, if you're looking at $5,000 or $6,000, probably not. If you're looking at $50,000, probably should. So you have to just kind of figure out where
if you see something too, right? Like Sometimes we try to get back the oldest date to give them a shot at the oldest, most remote date of onset,
Mhm.
knowing that it might not fly, but you got to give it a shot in case evidence,
Yeah.
there is enough evidence, or else they're
Well,
never
I
going
mean,
to have a shot. And then, so
look, I
maybe you
think,
don't appeal because you're like, well, we tried, but it's really not that strong. So I would just
yeah.
stick with what they gave you.
Well, look, I mean, if they approved you at your 55th birthday using the grid rule, which is a very common thing to have happen, and you say, no, I became disabled at age 52, and you appeal it, the risk is probably not that great because, a lot of people get approved as of their 55th birthday. So you take a chance and you get a reasonable judge, and the judge is going to say, okay, I either agree with you at 52 or some date thereafter, or I'll go with the 55. The risk you run is you get judged 12%. And I've never had it happen, but you could
Me
get a
neither.
really
Thank
bad
God.
judge, and you basically pulled defeat from the jaws of victory. And so,
Yeah.
that's the I have a form letter, and basically it says, look, I think you were talking about $50,000, $60,000. I think it's worth giving it really due consideration. They did approve you at your 51st birthday. That can happen again. Or you have a better shot at it. Maybe a judge is going to say, I'll give you 52, but worse, most of the time, the worst case would be you're again at 55, no harm, no foul, other than it's taken a couple more years. But the risk is you get a really bad judge, and the judge decides you're not disabled at all. That is the risk. And so I had a guy they changed it. It was $100,000, $110,000 difference. And I said, we should appeal this. $110,000. Nope, don't want to take the chance. Like, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Like I
Yep.
need this money and I can't risk it. And okay, all right,
And sometimes the misery of just doing the whole process of the case is so stressful for a lot of people. Even if they have an attorney, someone to, vent to or whatever, and it's just too much, and they just want some peace, and they want to just be able to move forward. And I
yeah,
totally get it.
yeah. No, it can be a very stressful process.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So Sarah said, ask a question in last week's live stream. Sent a letter from the hearing judge, said that there were basically, she went to a hearing, was denied, that the judge said that there were some light duty jobs she could do. Let's see what the rest of it. And endocrinologist went to basic medication, unlimited bathroom breaks. Let's see here. Can I appeal it? I have that letter on top of the FMLA accommodations I should have taken. So it sounds like, Sarah, that there's new evidence that you've uncovered or you've got access to now that was not considered by the judge. Yeah, I mean, I think that my understanding is, and again, I'm not the appellate person. I bring somebody on typically to assist with appeals work, but I think that if it existed and it wasn't available and you can add it to the mix, I think it's probably relevant. Yeah, probably. Well, certainly there's no harm in appealing it. I mean, they turned you down, and if you have new evidence there, I would probably, my initial gut would say, talk to somebody who does appeals counsel, district court work, and see what the best way to deal with that new evidence might be. Do you have any other? I mean, do you do AC work at all?
Me? Yeah, I
Yeah.
do appeal. I do AC, but I don't do FTC. So,
So,
yeah, I do AC. Not
all right.
infrequently.
And maybe you have. I don't know if you have an answer to this question. Let's say you have an unfavorable hearing decision, and then after that, the endocrinologist writes a letter for you saying, that this person, Sarah, needs unlimited bathroom breaks because of her diabetic complications, and she's going every 45 minutes, and that would have been a factor that I think would be pretty compelling in a vocational testimony. Can you add that new evidence at the appeals council level, or is it
I don't. I think it depends on the region because they have different. I think
okay?
so. They have slightly different. So it really depends. But I think most of them, I think they're like, no, you should have had that before the judge because
Yeah,
otherwise, no judge can even definitively just
yeah.
rely on the evidence he
The
had and
record's
make a
closed,
logic.
right?
But
I
I
mean,
think what Sarah might be saying is she testified. Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you saying there was evidence in the thing about needing to go to the bathroom a lot and all that? Maybe it's an IBS thing or a urinary frequency or who knows what. But
yeah.
um, And I do find that if they want to deny, and I wonder, Sarah, if you're under 50, they kind of blow that off,
Yeah.
and they don't address it. And I'm thinking maybe if it was really, really rampant through the medical records, like the PCP's talking about it every visit, maybe you have a urologist, whatever. I think maybe it would be an appealable issue if the judge never just says, with regard to bathroom breaks, I think they could be accommodated by, like, yes, it's somehow, how like they have to address certain things that are
Mhm.
in the record to show why they're not giving it much credence. Like
Yeah.
they don't have to do every little nugget of evidence, but there's
they
like,
considered it.
at some place there's like a level. If the evidence, it's very esoteric, but like if there's a certain amount of evidence that it's kind of a lot of it, so you got to kind of address why. Because I know some people get upset when they say, he didn't. There was something in my, 18 months ago where it said this, and he didn't address it. I go, well, they don't address every
Right.
statement in the 1,000-page, they can't. But I would think if it was like repeated at every visit, and it was definitely a big thing talked about, was how often I'm in the bathroom and I can't even get to the grocery store without going to the bathroom twice or whatever. That maybe then it would be an appealable issue that he didn't address it. You know what I mean?
Right.
If it's really heavily in there.
Yeah, and I think that you may raise another point is that the appeals council and the district court, who are the next level after the hearing, they are going to look at a judge's decision, and they're going to certain things. They're going to just say we're going to give the judge. We're going to let what the judge's conclusions ride. We're not going to second guess the judge's conclusion, his analysis or her analysis of the evidence. We may disagree with what they concluded, but they did the analysis properly. And so, you may have a judge who covered his or her tracks well enough that the appeals council is going to say, we're not going to step in the shoes of that judge and second guess him. And you may say, well, the judge is just wrong. And the judge may be wrong, but that's not going to be an appealable issue, unfortunately. And that's the frustrating thing about this area is that, you may get a judge that is, client A or claimant A gets a judge who approves 65% of the cases and is very open to your testimony and reading the evidence in your most in your favor. Judge B is a 30% approval rate and is looking for reasons to turn you down. And it's just the luck of the draw. You get a good judge, you win. You get a bad judge, you lose. And it sucks, but that's just unfortunately the game that we were in. Frustrating. Jacob Howard, hello from Barry, Kentucky. I have RA on the shot once a week and chemo pill. Doctors filled out the paperwork saying I need to keep my feet up at least 8 hours a day. Will miss more than 4 days. I'm only 46. I think that that's a pretty significant limitation on your functional capacity.
Huge.
And again, assuming the judge believes it and the evidence is compelling, being 46 is not going to stop you from getting approved. Would it be easier if you were 56? Yes. But again, a limitation at that level is pretty work preclusive, wouldn't you think? I mean, I don't see how somebody's going to work if they got to have their feet up 8 hours a day.
Yeah, if the judge believes that it looks like you had him do an RFC, maybe. Yeah, the doctor filled out, which is always risky. But then the question is that opinion of his substantiated throughout his treatment records of you? Or is it the first time he's even mentioning it? With something that's severe, it better be in his other records, or it's going to look like he just pulled it out of thin air, and it might not hold a lot of water.
But if all it's there being 46 is not going to hurt you, in my opinion.
Right. If that can be, if that stuff's in the records, that's huge. That's really huge.
That's really compelling. All right, Stephanie, this is the person who got SSI, and she says, I have all my credits. And again, this is going to be something where somebody's going to have to really dig into the paperwork. Let me just throw one more thing at you. Having enough credits for retirement Social Security is not the same thing as disability. Disability looks at the last 10 years. Retirement looks at your lifetime. So when you say you have enough credits, are you talking about for Social Security retirement or for disability? Again, I think that you want to have somebody, who knows what they're looking at, really look at that record. And if you can get copies of your record, that would be very, very helpful, I think.
I think if you go online to your SSA.gov account and look for the link for your earnings statement, that is going to have all of your years, and that's when you have a pending claim or not. And you can do the calculations or try to get someone else who can do them and chart it out backwards and find out when your DLI last ended. And
Yeah,
we
what
all have to do
what
it.
you would do is every year the figure for credits changes. In fact, I've got it on my
The dollar value.
for this SocialSecurityDisability.com website. There's a link to it says Social Security's confusing list of tables. It's under the FAQ, and there's a link to how much money you have to generate one credit. So what you would do is say 2019 you needed X number of dollars to get 4 credits. 2020 one credit was this, 4 credits was that. You get only 4 credits in a year, so you can back into it. I bet you could probably even plug that into a AI tool and say, "What's my date last insured?" It might tell you. Again, you got to be careful because you know if it's going to tell you correctly, but that may be something.
Right.
Maybe an interesting test to do to get some statements and just plug it in and see if it gives you the correct information, because that would be it's a mechanical function there. But yeah, I think
it's all math.
Yeah, it's just simple math. And what I do is I'll take a spreadsheet, like a Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheet spreadsheet, and you plug in their earnings by year and how much you needed for how many credits you get for those earnings, and you see 3 here, 4 here, and you look it up and you figure out how many credits when your date last insured is, or you can even call Social Security and say, "What's my date last insured?" If you can get through, they may tell you. So.
Yeah, they'll tell you.
Yeah, they will. If you can get through. All right. Bala, 2001, how are you doing? Hello. Sarah D. Okay, I think we already talked about that. Good evening. Wow, both of us at once. Yeah, it's a rare thing. You get
Hey, 12.
Hey.
Oh.
You get some compliments there, Steph. There. No hitting on my guest, please. Okay, she's a married woman. All right. If someone's up for CDR, they get a short form. A short form. Okay. How do they fill that out? Would they need to include the remarks section? I think you fill it out as accurately and truthfully as possible. I think you just have to tell the truth in it. And if there's nothing to put in the remarks, don't put anything in there. But if they're, I don't know that the remarks are going to really help you any. I think it's really more about, just the information. If that's a question, you could pose to a lawyer. Should I say something here? Or should I just let it ride? It's my thought, Christy. Mary Simmons. Okay. Get this question a good bit. Seeing your orthopedic doctor, your physical therapist, primary doctor, I see a chiropractor. Yes, you can, but realize the chiropractor analysis or conclusion or statement of the limitations is not going to carry any weight. It's considered alternative medicine. And what that will show is you did seek treatment, and you can talk about the treatment helped or didn't help, but the chiropractor's conclusions about your functional capacity will be given no weight. That's the way I see that. Would you agree?
His observations would be like anybody else's observations, and they might be considered like if he observes she was in pain after our session today, or she walked in with a limp, that's probably helpful. But yeah, it's not an acceptable medical source.
Yeah, it's not going to.
It's a medical source, but not a. Yeah, it's not the MD or the DO or the nurse practitioner now that can do it and stuff like that.
And I will say this: a lot of chiropractors, because this issue comes up in personal injury cases, because a lot of people go to chiropractors, and I've gone to a chiropractor, and a good chiropractor can definitely make you feel better. For certain types of injuries, it can be perfectly fine, soft tissue injuries. But many of them realize that their conclusions are not going to be given a lot of weight by insurance companies or by government agencies. And so they will have a doctor either who comes in once a week or who's on the, in the same building, and they have the doctor basically bless what they've done and issue a report that basically confirms what the chiropractor came up with. That can be helpful. But, just pure chiropractic, I know chiropractors get very defensive about, they think the American Medical Association is, kind of squeezing them out. And look, Eastern medicine, acupuncture is alternative medicine. So there's a lot of very effective types of treatment that are not given any weight by Social Security for whatever reason. But I think if you what I would say, my conclusion has been, if you're going to a chiropractor or an acupuncturist or a naturopath that don't give it, they're not considered acceptable medical sources, you can say, I did, I tried the traditional way. I don't want to be drugged up. I don't want surgery. I'm doing something. And that's better than doing nothing, is my take. If you don't go to the doctor at all, go to anybody at all, and just kind of sit at home, Social Security is going to conclude, well, if you're not going to the doctor, there's nothing wrong with you. So I think if you do it, go someplace, at least that would help. But don't ask a functional capacity form from the chiropractor is not going to do you any good, is the point here.
And don't replace physical therapy with chiropractic. It's
Yeah.
one thing to have it added on, right?
Yeah.
But because I see some people who try to substitute it in because they don't want to do both, and I'm like, well, it's weakening your case to make that choice.
I agree. And you don't necessarily know that, and you're thinking, okay, I want to get better, which is admirable. But if you give up traditional medical treatment for chiropractic, you're going to hurt your case, unfortunately. All right. So Sarah says, should my disability lawyer help you appeal? I'm not a big fan of telling people to appeal something on their own. I think you should, if your lawyer doesn't want to help you with an appeal, I think you're the person who's got the SSI, SSDI case. I would say if the lawyer doesn't want to help you, ask and it's a tough call because the lawyer wants to get paid and has gotten paid, but basically to release you so that, if you appeal, there'll be no claim for fees on any success with the appeal, because and this is something that, not a lot of people realize, and we can talk about this a little bit, and that is, if you change lawyers, that can be a real problem because in a Social Security case, because if the first lawyer will not withdraw and waive fees, then the second lawyer, nobody gets paid on a fee agreement. You got to file a fee petition. And I don't know if you have any fee petitions out there, but they can take years, and if they ever get paid at all. So, you want to get your lawyer.
A nightmare.
Say what?
They're a nightmare. Everybody hates them, right?
Yeah. So I think if you're going to, appeal something like that, you want to get your lawyer to release the case and say, I'm accepting what I was paid on the SSI part as full and complete compensation for my work. I will not ask for anything more. Here's a 1696 sub 2 form, and I'm withdrawing from representation, and, just make it very clear. But I would have someone else look at it. And you probably don't have a lot of time. And again,
wait fee.
Yeah. And if I would also ask your lawyer to get you the exhibit file, send it to you by an email or burn it to a CD, because you're going to need that. It's it's an uphill battle. I find it very hard many times to take up when somebody else has been working on a file and they, decide the lawyer withdraws or waives fees, whatever. I'm looking at it, and you get in the middle of it, and it's, there's a lot of stuff that's hard to, it becomes, trying to fix problems is difficult in this area, especially if you got a hearing coming up or you got a pending deadline. So I'm not a huge fan of doing that many times.
Sarah, I will add, I think Sarah had a hearing already with the judge, right? That's the one with the bathroom break. Okay. The appeals council appeal is super, you might not know how to do a brief or anything. They're not required, and it's like a 30-second thing online. It's not like your other appeals where you got to put in new doctors.
Right.
It's literally just clicking, yes, I want to do the appeals council. And appeals council is supposed to review the whole case, not depending on what you say in your little, if you do a little blurb. So you can do it very easily yourself. It would be nice if your lawyer would do it for you and maybe, point out some things that he thinks maybe were, appealable, but maybe he doesn't think anything is, you know what I mean? He might not find anything to be.
But I think your point is well taken. And that is, even if you can't get another lawyer time-wise, and just file just to preserve your case, file an appeal, look
right
up,
online.
Right. Do it online, file an appeal to the appeals council, and just file it. Worst comes to worst, it gets denied, but now you have 5-6 months maybe to find a lawyer. And so you're not under this time pressure, but you don't want to miss that 60-day deadline.
And the next lawyer you're looking for might be an FDC lawyer, and they are harder to get.
Federal district
court. Very
particular.
Federal district court. If you're going to keep that appeal going, because you kind of have to, if it's the SSD, because you don't have any more. Did you lose the whole? She's not the double one, though, not the SSI and the SSD, right?
I thought so.
Because
No,
if you file for appeals counsel, you cannot file a new
yes, yeah.
claim generally.
No, this is not the person. That was a different person.
Yeah.
Stephanie Alford was the person. So Sarah D. That's who's the person who got denied by the judge and says now I
For
have
the
evidence
breaks.
I think would be relevant. So
Yeah. So look at, one thing you have to look at with whether you're going to appeal to appeals counsel is, do I have no other choice? Is my
yeah,
date last insured now in the past? So I don't even have any window of which to file a new claim for the subsequent period. Or can I, is my DLI in the future and I can file a new claim and maybe I'll forego the appeals counsel. It's really a personal thing, but you got to find out what your DLI is before you can even figure out what you're going to do.
a lot of moving parts, and I think you're better off getting a lawyer. But again, if you have to get something filed to avoid the deadline or to meet the deadline, go ahead and do that. All right, Shiloh M. Hi there.
Hello.
You pull up the form 3368. So sound about right. Put stooping 15 minutes, kneeling 15, crouching. I mean, if that's what your limitations are, that is a fairly, that level of impairment is pretty significant. So, again, depends on how old you are. But yeah, I think that I hate to say what sounds right. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly if you can, stoop for an hour and kneel for an hour, that's not very limiting as far as your capacity. So 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, no crawling, fingers, it's going to depend on your, what the medical says and what the reality is ultimately. But that is not unreasonable what you're putting there. I hate to tell people, I would never tell somebody what to put. What I would say to them is, if you can stand and walk for 5 hours, that's probably not going to help your case. So,
is he talking about
I think the
3368, the kind of work he did in his job, or it's not a 3369, but it's also not a 3373.
Yeah, let's see. A disability report. That's the disability report.
Yeah, that's the one we put on your medical doctors.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is basically just the form that you would submit with an appeal or just part of your case, and it asks you what you can do. And again, the truth is the starting point. You tell the truth, but what I find is a lot of people overstate their capacity because they don't think of themselves as disabled, which is a good thing. But for a let's just say a 57-year-old man who is a bodybuilder or who is in the an Army Ranger to say I can't stand for 15 minutes, that's a hard thing for that person to do. So you have to just really step back and think about, could I do this 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, month after month? And sometimes having a third party or a lawyer talk to you about it, just come up with what's an accurate but reasonable conclusion can be helpful. Because look, I've had people, I'll say to them, how much can you lift? And they never thought about it. I'm 50 pounds. Like 50 pounds. You know how that's heavy. That is heavy. I mean, that's a lot of weight. And people don't know. And again, the time to think about it for the first time is not at your hearing. The time is to think about it beforehand. I always tell people a gallon of milk is 8 pounds. Well, if you pick up a gallon of milk or water and you hold it, and imagine two of them, one in the left hand, one in the right hand, that would be hard for anybody to do. I mean, I'm in pretty decent shape. That would be hard for me to hold that for 10 minutes, straight. So, weight is, it's easy to overstate what you can do. And there's also a difference between occasionally and frequently. Frequently means like, 2/3 of the day. Occasionally is 1/3 of the day. Well, if you could do it one time and that was it, that's less than occasional. So you need to back off of that. My view.
Yeah, I think I've heard people say when they've given me I see one on their like function report draft, and they'll say, and I'll say, what did you put 40 pounds? That's a lot of weight. And they'll say, well, my grandson is 40 pounds, and I picked him up the other day. And I'm like, how did it feel? She's like, well, that's a little nerve-wracking to do it. But I said, could you keep doing that for like 2.5 hours
Right.
out of an 8-hour day? Could you? And then it kind of makes it look like, oh no,
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. That means I could do it once. I'm like, well, technically you could probably lift up a car if it's going to save your
Yeah.
grandson underneath it. You know what I mean? Like that adrenaline. So don't go with what you could do in an emergency or what you've done. And then you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. What can you do? At least on a little bit of a sustained basis, I think.
Yeah.
I think
Look, I mean,
think about a little bit.
I have a hex bar that I use to work out with, and I've got 100 pounds on the bar, and the bar itself's like 45 pounds. So, I'm, doing 145, 150 pounds or whatever, and I can do it for, 25 reps or 30 reps. I couldn't do it for 3 hours in a day. I mean, I could do it, I can maybe do, 3 or 4 sets, but I can't. So yeah, what is my lifting capacity, on a, fairly frequent, even on an occasional basis, it's not 150 pounds. I mean,
right. Could you go out and do a heavy job doing 150 pounds all day long? No, right.
No, not at my advanced age. Absolutely could not. There's no way. All right. M. Steele from Savannah, Georgia. M. Steele, how are you doing? I've been to Savannah many times. My dad was actually born in Savannah, Georgia. My college roommate lives in Savannah. So I've been down there many times. It is actually a little humid down there, but it's a nice place. And have you ever been to Savannah, Steph?
Yeah, I actually was in an in-person hearing in Savannah once.
Wow. Okay.
Long time ago. That was so long ago. Because my in-laws, well, my father-in-law still lives in Bluffton, South Carolina.
Yeah, South Carolina.
It's not far. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, Hilton Head, because we a lot of times will go to Hilton Head in the summertime, and used to be you had to go sort of through Savannah. Now you can bypass it, but we would sometimes go to Savannah for a day, and then go to Hilton Head for the rest of the time. And it's picturesque. They have the ghost tours, and they have River Street. It's actually St. Patrick's Day, whole green beer thing and the green fountains and all that stuff. So it was actually the first I think the first city in Georgia, and it's a small town, but it's not that small. It's just maybe the second or third biggest city in Georgia. But yeah, it's a nice place to visit. Again, a little humid for me, but in fact, that's when my grandfather, my dad was born there, and they moved to Atlanta because my grandfather couldn't handle the heat and the humidity, so they moved to Atlanta. Which is
that different, huh? Wow, the difference is that much.
Yeah. Okay. Jacob Howard, have a court date on the 28th of the month on appeal to see the judge. Okay, well, you've got the 28th, so we're now on the 11th, so you've got, a little time. You want to make sure that all the medical evidence, I'm sure your lawyer would know this, you've got to have it in within 5 business days, or typically 7 to 8 calendar days before you're here. So you want to, I would say, soft deadline the 20th of the month, make sure that record's complete. You don't want to, have to submit anything after that. And I think that you want to, make sure you and your lawyer have a working theory of your case. Is it a grid rule case? Is it a functional capacity case? Is it a listing argument? Probably not, but is it and what is the argument you're making? And really try to be able to, boil it down to its most barest essentials. If a judge says to you, why or do you feel you're not able to work? You can give a 5 or 6 sentence answer to it. You're not stumbling around. You can be real specific, and that's a good way to prepare for it. And just have your lawyer give you question you, and go over the questions you're going to be getting, because I think that's a good way to practice it.
And if you your lawyer obviously knows about the 5-day rule, Jacob, but if you are pro se, know that if you know that there's some evidence that isn't in, as long as you tell the judge in that 5-day, like he said, 8-day soft deadline, I try to just push it to 10 because, gosh forbid, something happens. If you tell him that you requested it, it's coming in, and you make sure you tell him in writing before that deadline runs, he can then feasibly leave the hearing open for you to get it in. He might give you an extra 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But he might not do it if you don't do that. Correct.
Right. Some judges are like, I want to get everything in, and I'm not trying to form over substance. Other judges like it wasn't in, no 5-day letter, you're not getting it in. So, in fact, I didn't even realize this, but I had a judge accept a brief that I had filed within 5 days. He's like, your briefs need to be done within the 5 days, before the.
I knew that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. So I changed my process.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So EJ got his CDR results. So basically, probably the short form answer was all no, and they got a response in a couple of weeks. They're continuing benefits, which is good.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. Kansas Star has an upcoming phone hearing. Want to understand what to expect so you can prepare calmly and effectively. Again, this is what your lawyer is supposed to help you with, is to practice. I mean, I actually have videos that I give my clients that are unique, or specific to my clients. And I'll say, here's what happens at a hearing. I may have one of those on my YouTube channel, but, I think it's just, there's a certain process that you go through. You're always going to be asked certain questions. If it's physical, how long can you stand? How long can you sit? How far can you walk? How much can you lift? Do you have to take unscheduled breaks during the day? Do you have trouble with personal care, getting dressed, bathing, things like that? If it's mental health, you have trouble with focus and concentration, brain fog. You just have to be able to go through all these things so you cover it all. And again, it's going to be specific to your case, but that's what your lawyer is supposed to be doing for you. My take.
Yep, I agree. And if you don't have one, maybe look at your function report that you submitted. So those are the kind of questions that might come up.
Right.
It's nice for you to know what you said before. And then if your answer is different now, you'll at least know what it was. And you can say, well, this has changed. You could, when the judge asks you, he'll probably ask you those questions.
Yep.
Some of them anyway.
All right. And so you've got Judge Cheryl Carvalho from the Fort Worth office. I'm looking at her approval rate. Her approval percentage is 61%, 49% fully favorable, 12% partially favorable. That is a little bit above average. I think you probably have a pretty good judge. And I know, Steph, you don't like to look at these things, but I like to look at them.
I know, but it's not my case, so
yes, that's right.
Good.
So,
and I'm glad for her though, because it doesn't hurt.
Reasonable judge. And then the question is, let me just because we're amongst friends here, let me see if anybody has any comments about it. I don't think I've ever been in front of this particular judge, but let's see if there's anything on the listserv. Oops. Of course, I just misspelled everything there.
Can you do a search with that?
I'm going to do a quick search.
Are you asking them? You're asking them?
No, I'm just doing a quick thing to see if anybody has any comments.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
I don't see anything.
Did you spell it right? Carvalho.
Yeah, I think I said Carvalho. Let's see if he has anything. No, I'm not seeing anything here. So I don't see anything here. So, let's see here. Okay, which I'm going to try to refer to case. So no, I'm not seeing anything here. I'll just try one more place here. Carvalho. Okay, let's see. Here's something here. Any information somebody asked, and nobody has given an answer. So somebody asked back in 2024, what do we know about this judge, and nobody responded. So sometimes on the listserv, people don't know, they don't respond, so you don't always know. Only thing we do know is she has a 61% approval rate, which is good. That's a good sign, but I've got no other comments beside that. I would assume, like most judges, they're going to want, if you can do a brief, that would be a good thing. If you can, spell out your argument, or your lawyer can spell out his or her argument, that's a good thing. But I have nothing else to tell you other than the percentage, which I would be much more concerned if it was 30%. So 61%. The average, I think, is 49%. So 61% is pretty darn good. All right, Dennis asked about the short form. I think it's form SSA 455. Let me just see if I'm right on that. SSA 455 is the short form, I believe. Yes, that's the short form. And it basically asks, like, in subparts, like 8 questions. And so, I think if you just answer it, and basically nothing has changed, many times a human being won't even see it and they will continue your benefits. But again, it's got to be the truth. Got to be the truth. Um, okay. So Kansas Star says, I reviewed my employment records and I saw I missed over 1,000 hours of work my last 2 years of employment, FMLA, sick leave, and sick leave pool hours. How should I explain that kind of attendance issue to the judge? If it clearly shows your functional limitations. Well, I mean, I think that you have to draw a connection between your missed work and your medical issues. Just missing work doesn't mean you're disabled, but obviously, if that's consistent with diagnosis and treatment, again, this is something where that evidence of this time would be something you submit, and you'd want your lawyer to draw that conclusion in a brief and also in your testimony. So, yeah, it sort of speaks for itself, but you want to make sure you explain that the reason you missed all this time was because you were going to the doctor or you were having really hard problems getting out of bed or whatever the case may be. And, the other question is, how did you manage to keep your job with all those absences? But I think you just have to have some way to make that connection.
She does mention FMLA, so that might have been intermittent. Maybe she had, which would by definition be for, assuming it was a sick FMLA and not a child or family member.
Right. Yeah, you can't, if you went on FMLA because your mom was sick or you had a sick kid, God forbid, that doesn't mean you're disabled. And people sometimes say, well, I had to stay home to take care of my child. Well, it doesn't mean you're disabled. But yeah, assuming it's for you, for medical issues you've got, if you can identify those medical issues and somehow link them to the time you missed. And again, this is where a third-party statement can come in handy. A coworker who can talk about what he or she observed about you and the problems you were having. But I think that is a very strong bit of evidence because it shows that you were missing work. And again, vocational witnesses, which most judges will have in hearings, will testify that between 10 and 15% off task in the course of a day or ongoing is a problem and would preclude competitive work, as would missing a day of work a month. And some VEs will say 10% off task, others 15%. But this amount of time, 1,000 hours, that's a lot.
That's like a quarter of a year. That's a lot.
I would probably narrow it because presumably your onset date is after you stopped working. I would really look at the last 3 or 4 months in particular. You can have the other stuff there, but say the last 3 or 4 months, either it got worse or it stayed the same. But yeah, this is what I was dealing with. But I think you will need to explain how you kept the job. Well, maybe it was your cousin was the supervisor, or you're working at home or something like that. Because that obviously the VE is going to say that's not consistent with competitive employment. Yet you kept your job. So how did you do that? And like I said, sometimes it's because it's a friend or a relative or somebody who was the boss.
Or the FMLA, where they couldn't.
Right. Okay. All right. So again, I think this.
Now,
go ahead.
I was just going to say accommodations can be damaging, can hurt a case.
How so?
I believe. Because it's my understanding when they're looking at your past relevant work. So if it's in your relevant 5 years and you had an accommodation, that's included as part of your past relevant work duties. Like they don't look at it for future jobs, but for the past relevant work jobs. So it's like if they find you could do that job with that accommodation, then you could do that job. And even if they say even if the accommodation no longer is offered or exists, because it's crushing, really. I mean, I always tell people don't even go into your accommodations because if it's part of your past relevant work. It's one of the Social Security rulings.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, yeah, it's like so. Sometimes people, sometimes people will say, "Well, I had a lot of accommodations. My coworker used to help me instead of me carrying the water the whole way. They would, start helping me or whatever." And I'm like, "Was that official or was that just them being kind?" Well, that's just them being kind. But if I'd asked for it, I'm like, "You don't want to ask." I'm like, "Let's not go there." If it wasn't an official accommodation, You can talk about how you had to get a lot of help and weren't doing the job fully yourself. But the
Mhm.
second you might broach into accommodation, if that's going to be a job in your past relevant work, now you have to prove you can't do it with accommodation. So it just makes it harder to prove you can't do it.
I see what you're saying. So it's almost the same. And the other side of it would be if you had a job that, you actually performed, let's say the job is like I had a client who was a firefighter and is classified as medium. And he talked about he had to lift 100 pounds. So it was performed at heavy. So
Mhm.
they look at your past relevant work, they're going to consider it as a heavy job because that's what you did. What you're saying is on the other side of it, if you, let's say the job normally required you to lift 20 pounds, but you only had to do 10 because you had an accommodation, the way you performed that past job was 10 pounds. And so you got to prove you couldn't do it that way, I think is what you're getting.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
it's an annoying little
Yeah.
factoid of the law there on that one.
Got it. All right. So EJ says the short form took a year and a half to get a response, and then the long form got the results. So it looks like the short form took a year and a half, the long form took 2 weeks, which is crazy. But I think this goes to the point of that people get these continuing reviews and it can sit there for months or even years. And that is very stressful. I mean,
Yeah,
imagine,
that's
imagine you go through the process, you get approved, you get a review form and it sits there. You don't get any notification, nothing. It just sits there for a year and a half. That's got to drive you nuts, I would think. That's just crazy. But what are we doing? What are we doing? All right. S. Green says denied SSDI with administrative law judge. Well, within 60 days, you need to look at getting an appeal filed if you want to. And my observation would be, my thoughts would be, if you have a lawyer, ask your lawyer if that person is comfortable filing appeals to the appeals council. Some don't. I've done them, for example, but I'm so busy now with hearings that I typically bring on somebody else to do them because it's kind of a different ball game. I mean, don't you think? I mean, it's sort of you're dealing with case law. You're dealing with certainly at district court level, but even with the appeals council, you're sort of dealing in a different universe, in my opinion. So I'll bring on Carl Osterhout, or I'll bring on Brian Konoski. Sometimes there's some other folks that I'll work with. But I tend to not to want to. I like to have another pair of eyes look at them. I'll write the brief, but I like to have somebody else look at them and usually get some input. That's the way I would do it. So, but if your lawyer does it, talk to them about getting an appeal filed. If they don't do it, then look for somebody who can, and find somebody who's very comfortable and familiar with doing that. Many lawyers will only do appeals counsel work for their own cases. They won't take on other cases. Others, that's all they do is appeals work. There are several lawyers that just do district court work, which is kind of crazy. I didn't realize there was that much out there, but I think
I
Adriana,
love them.
huh? Yeah, no,
I
like,
love them.
yeah, Adriana De La Torre, who's been on here a couple of times, and she's great. She's a very prolific writer, great LinkedIn profile to follow. And I think all she does is district court work. I think Brian Konoski, all he does is district court work. And there are a few other lawyers that just do that. And they, because it's a very specialized area. And if you're doing it, especially all over the country, Rose, we have 9, what is it? We have 9 circuits or 10. I don't even know how many we have. Federal circuits. I know there's at least 9. And so if you're in the First Circuit, the law may be different than if you're in the Ninth Circuit. If you're in the Fourth Circuit, different than the 11th Circuit. So you have to have somebody who knows the laws, and they're not that different, but they're different enough where you got to know, which is where you're practicing at. And so, yeah, you got to find somebody who really knows what they're doing. So again, it's just it's a very different, very, very different type of work. So, and again, like I said, I mean, if somebody comes to me with a unfavorable decision that another lawyer did, what I would ask for would be, and I'm sure Steph, you'd feel the same way. You need to withdraw from the prior lawyer, so there won't be a problem getting paid. And then I would take it to somebody who does this, and have them give me an opinion on it, and then see if there's a path forward. I probably have 5 or 6 appeals for cases that not my cases. And I did the brief with some help you got to ask for help if if you think it's appropriate.
Yeah, I just took one, maybe in the last like 2 months. It's not my case, but he was denied an ALJ. So I did the appeals council appeal for him and did the brief,
Yeah.
and did it on mostly on the decision because he didn't have the file. But reading the decision
Yeah.
and seeing what maybe didn't match up, and just you do the best you can, and either way we'll take it forward if we have to file anew or we get a remand. So I'll be with him the whole time.
I got an unfavorable decision today in a case that I think should have been approved, and the rationale was, and there were some quirks in this case, but the rationale was that this person would have met the grid rule if it was found that she could not do skilled work. Well, the consultative psych report says that certain mental functions, focus and concentration, let's just say, were moderately to markedly impaired, and ability to maintain attendance markedly or moderately to markedly impaired. The judge says that's too vague. Moderately to markedly is too vague. It needs to be one or the other. And I'm thinking, what? That makes because what the judge, what the doctor, this is their doctor, is saying that it's more than moderate, but maybe less than marked. Well,
yeah.
Make a conclusion that there's something in between there, and so I can argue that the cumulative effect of, between moderate and marked, with two or three categories is enough to eliminate skilled work. So to say that that's too vague and they're not going to give that any weight seems to be appealable to me. And that was just my thought.
I would think, and not to mention, moderate is an SSA terminology, as is market. So that doesn't, because first of all, he should at least say, well, I'm just going to assume that it's moderate, which I think would still be appealable if he said that, because that's not what the expert said.
Right.
But how can he can say, well, we know it. Yeah, that does sound something appealable. It just seems like a really
send him out for another exam. I mean, if it's unclear, send him out for another CE. I mean, I think that's where the ALJ's got to develop the record. So I wrote my client. I said, we got to really look at appealing this, because it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, how this is what the doctor said. So it's almost like saying, if I don't know. I mean, like, let's talk about weight. More than 10 but less than 50. Okay, well that means that it's maybe it's more than sedentary but less than medium. Whatever it may be. The point is, you could come up with some way to quantify that, or ask the send them out for another psych evaluation. But I think that to me is appealable.
Something, just to disregard the whole thing.
Yeah, that's right. I think
inappropriate.
That's it. Just jumped out at me. It's like, what? Okay. Okay. Just won my ALJ. Good. I thank God for both of you. Okay. Great.
Awesome.
Because with no knowledge of what we're against, and listen to you both always. Okay. Well, thank you, Christopher. I think we both appreciate that. I know that, we both do a lot of work on video and live streaming and all that stuff. And, this is a black box out there. And I think, I kind of started doing it just because I felt like I wanted people to kind of know what they're dealing with here. There's, it's a black box. I mean, nobody really knows. And so, you try to educate people. I always tell folks, it's kind of, I'm sure you feel the same way. Good karma. You put good stuff out in the world, it comes back. And not for
yeah. And you just meet some really great people too.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Hello, Jen. How are you doing? Jen used to work with me for many years. Did a very good job. Shub 281. Thanks for the clarification. Wait after a CDR to do surgery. Okay, and again, Shub had asked the question of, should
CDR
be concerned about going for surgery, and before a CDR, the idea that if he had the surgery, it was successful, would that make his CDR likely to result in a termination? Our feeling was it probably wouldn't, given that it was still he'd still grit out. But, some people decide they may want to wait. Yeah, that's perfectly legitimate. Okay, if the last day of work was June of 20, your hearing is on August of 26, is there past relevant work? No, because assuming that your date last insured is after your hearing. So if your date last insured was in 2023, you go back 5 years from 2023. If your date last insured is in 2029, then yes, the 5 year look back would be August of 2021, as after your last work, there is no past relevant work. Now, you'll be 50 in July. So, the grid doesn't really help you unless you're willing to basically, unless the judge decides you're disabled as of your 50th birthday. Past relevant work is only one factor here. I mean, you have to prove that you can't do it. It changes the burden of proof and all that stuff. But the judge would still have to find at age 49 that you can't do any kind of work at all. So, past relevant work, not having that really helps you when you're in grid rule territory, because it makes it easier to meet the grid rules. But as far as being 49, 48, not having past relevant work, that is a factor, but you still have to prove now you can't do anything at all.
And I'm thinking with Twill's date that he or she last worked, that's 7/20/20. That DLI, unless you've been working part-time a little after and got some credits in 21 or 22 or 23 or 24,
Right.
25,
Probably
your
25.
DLI is in the past. It probably ended end of 2025.
Yeah. So you may
unless you did have a little bit of part-time work,
Yeah.
maybe you were trying some stuff part-time that was under SGA, but still got you
could
credits.
have got you credits.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So right. I think you got to see what your date last insured is, but yeah, you may have a little bit of past work. But again, if we're not in the grid rule territory, not as big of a deal. It's still relevant, but it can really help you when you're in the grid rule territory. Otherwise, you still have to prove at the end of the day you can't do anything, or during the time as of your onset date, there's literally no job at all. And literally there are jobs that are, I call them warm body jobs, where you're basically sitting there and you are, monitoring, teddy bears coming down an assembly line. I put a video. There was one, I had this video I found of this guy just like standing there, on his phone. He's watching stuff coming down an assembly line, and, hitting a button or something when it was, I mean, there's some jobs.
It's like
brainless, pretty brainless. Can a lawyer focus exclusively to the volume of cases? Yeah, I mean, most of us who do this is pretty much all that we do. I don't think you can dabble in this and be very effective. I mean, I know lawyers who do disability work, and they may do workers' comp, a little PI. But most lawyers who do this is pretty much all they do. It's not so much the volume; it's just that you got to know the way the system works. And like I've I'll get calls sometimes from lawyers who took on a case and they've got one case. They've never done it before. Very hard to get up to speed with all the things you got to know. And it shouldn't be this complicated, but it is. But,
Yeah, I always make the joke of those that have, like, if you go to their website and you see 5 different areas, usually it'll be like PI, personal injury. That's their big kit and caboodle. Then they throw a little workers' comp in there. Then they throw SSD is the redheaded stepchild for them. It's like the tag along thing. They usually don't know too much of what they're doing. Oftentimes, I should say.
Yeah.
And it's a redheaded stepchild because it's not going to be their big money bag.
Right.
So they just don't give it the attention because they've got to focus on those big cases that'll
Well, I find actually, I'm sure you have them up there, but there are a couple of really big time advertisers here in town in Atlanta that spend, millions of dollars on billboards and TV commercials, and they're doing it for PI, mostly PI, maybe a little workers' comp, and a few of them have Social Security. And I've always wondered, a lot of these big firms they hire, the typical model, not always, but many times they'll have an experienced lawyer as sort of the head of their litigation division, and they'll take on the big truck accident cases for litigation. The rest of them they're going to settle. And then they'll have a lawyer who's probably pretty new at it. But you do the Social Security, like you said, the redheaded stepchild of their practice. And you're like, does this person really know what they're doing? I mean, they may get some volume, which would certainly help them get better at it. But, it's hard to be to really, get good at something if you don't really do it full time. So yeah, I mean, I think that you need to really be doing it pretty much on a day-to-day basis to get comfortable with how it works, because things do change. Look, I mean, I remember I've had discussions with people. I was talking to some lawyer, just because I do some training, so CLE things. I was asking about the treating source rule. Well, that's been gone for years, but there's places online where it still talks about the treating source rule, and you could make a real fool of yourself if you don't know that's been gone, or there's some other things like that. So yeah. Okay. If someone gets cut off and never got any letters for a year, will they get an overpayment or get penalized if they reapply for a listing condition? Okay, I'm not sure what the letters for a year. If you reapply, if you were cut off and you didn't appeal it and you didn't get any money, then you reapply. There's no penalty to apply for disability.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what you're getting
And
at.
you might even be able to do an expedited reinstatement if you're cut off because of work earnings, not because of a CDR medical improvement.
Yeah.
And you don't have to.
I rarely deal with that. Do you deal much with expedited reinstatement? Have you dealt with that?
It's not that often.
Yeah.
I mean, most people don't, unfortunately, I would say, recover enough to go back to work. It's just, everyone's getting older while they're on this, it just doesn't often happen, but it happens sometimes. And yeah, I do. I did it for the same client once. Years later, just came back and we did it again.
My son had SSI as a child, has reviewed for turning 18. They reduced the portion of money as they think it's income from the source, but he doesn't, and they withhold that amount until the review. Yeah, they can. I mean, I think they can do whatever they want to do. I mean, at some point, the burden is on you to prove that he's not getting this money, or that he remains disabled. This can get really frustrating because, somebody at Social Security decided he's getting money from some source. It may show up in his earnings record. You don't know where they got that from, but once they make that decision, you got to prove it's not the case. And so proving a negative is hard.
Yeah. Like workers' comp, when they say, prove to us you have not received any workers' comp. How do you prove a negative?
Yeah.
I'm just curious with Focus Lady. They're not saying that he's living under your roof and you're giving him free room and board. Is that is it in-kind income, or are they saying he's getting cash? Because if it's in-kind income because you're giving him free room and board, start charging him rent and make a little lease thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can do an agreement to repay, and whatever you're paying him, create a lease agreement for room, like you said, room and board. And even if he doesn't pay it, he's obligated to do so. You can use that to show that he's not getting a gift. He's
like a bona fide, they say a bona fide loan agreement. Or in your case, if he's getting, now he's not getting SSI. I don't know if he's not getting it now.
Yeah, it's interesting because SSI, in my view, is a program almost designed to keep people in poverty. I mean, they haven't changed the numbers in so many years. It is a tough way to live. I mean, you can't really work. If you have any kind of assets, other than certain very limited things, they punish you for it. It's almost like they discourage you from trying to better yourself. I mean, SSDI, at least there's the trial work period, and there's, stuff. There's nothing like that for SSI. I just don't really understand why they would want to discourage people from trying to get better.
My big problem is that they have not used COLA on the savings amount. I don't really have a problem with that. It's a needs based. So therefore, if you've got, you shouldn't be having $500,000 and expect your neighbor to pay your bills,
Right.
But
right.
The fact that they don't use COLA, if $2,000 was considered an appropriate amount to let someone have in their bank account 40 years ago, how can that not be something vastly higher now?
Correct.
So if you're saying it was appropriate then, you have to recognize it's not appropriate now because of inflation. It's just a numbers thing. So that does bug me. And I know there's bills out there to try to get that more properly reflective.
Yeah, but there's just no political will for it. I mean, there's just this perception that people with disability on SSI in particular are just scamming the government, and it's just not true. But yeah, I mean, $2,000. I mean, seriously, 40. I mean, how can you like $2,000 in whatever 40 years ago was 1986 or whatever. I mean, it's just
Right.
insane. It's insane.
And even the federal benefit rate, which is adjusted, I think, by the same COLA, I think, the same index.
They've
You know,
increased
that doesn't
after
actually
budgeting.
reflect. It doesn't reflect real prices. You know, it's definitely like just the way Social Security, disability, and retirement beneficiaries get the COLA every year. That doesn't often reflect the real cost of living because it doesn't reflect housing prices, fuel prices, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not weighted properly, I guess, the basket of goods that they rely on to figure that out, I guess.
All right.
Seems.
So EJ thinks that we're having a power struggle. And I'm just thinking that you're from up north and you talk faster than me. So that's all. That's what that's
A power struggle. Where is that? That's funny.
Okay. Jen says hello. Hello, Jen, again. W.L. Gardner, good evening from Long Branch. Is that near where you is that near Philly? I don't know where Long Branch, New Jersey is.
Down south, right? Is that by the beach? Didn't
No
they
idea.
used to have a big haunted house down there?
Yeah, you're asking me. I have no idea.
I was from Jersey.
Very little about New Jersey. I've been there once or twice, but that's it. Okay. Okay. So I think that the 5 year, we're talked about this a little bit about work look back and so forth. All right. So I says hello to Jen. This is a question for either terms. Common to get initial denial reconsideration. That's a very good question. Is it common to get a denial at recon so quickly after you apply for those? You get a denial for initial, you file your recon appeal, you get a denial within 30 days, 40 days. That's pretty unusual to me. I've never seen that happen.
I think that's unusual too. I mean, it's unusual that they would get all the medical records that fast.
Yeah.
Unless everything is a HITMER, you
Yeah.
know.
But
what about having the person do it? Was there a second function report requested?
Yeah.
Or was the how long was the initial? I think that's really.
I mean, in some ways, it's a good thing because you can get to a hearing because very few cases are approved at recon. So you get the whole recon thing knocked out quickly. That's not a bad thing. But I've never.
I suppose if you have your goods already really strong, but if you don't, then you need that time to.
Yeah.
You know.
The disability examiners have approval rates. Yes, in a general sense, there's something called, if you look it up, it's called the waterfall chart. Just type in Google Social Security waterfall chart. In fact, Gordon Gates, who's a lawyer in Maine, he's got on his blog, he always posts every year. And I think I put it on my blog at ssdanswers.com as well. But you can see the waterfall chart every fiscal year. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the last one, it was like 35 or 36% of cases were approved at initial, most of those being listing level or compassionate allowance cases. Not all, but most of them are listing level. And then recon, I think was like 20%, although it's usually hovers between 12 and 15%. I still think that's kind of where it's at. Then you get to a hearing, it's like 48, 49%, which has actually moved up. A few years ago, it was like 42%. Then it's been kind of gradually ticking upwards to close to 50%. So there may be some statistics about individual states. If there are, I have not seen them, but generally speaking, initial is going to be 35%, with the caveat that most of those are listing level, people that have very, very serious problems. Recon is going to be probably 12 to 15%. Again, people with very, very serious problems. And then you get to a hearing, you start to see more judges looking at the case more holistically.
EJ, if you're asking about the disability examiners themselves, I think that's a no. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't break it out. It's not like the judges where they have the judges rates.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right. It'd be interesting if you did like a freedom of information, but I don't know that because the disability examiners, a case could be moved from one to the other. I don't think there's even that. I mean, there may be internal statistics, but I don't think we have.
Right. And they're probably more transient. They may not be lifers like the judges might be.
Yeah.
They're much longer.
Okay. If you have strong medical evidence for an alleged onset date that is in 2016, what's the possibility the approval of the claim will approve an alleged onset that's 10 years ago? Well, two comments. One is it's very hard to win with a remote onset date because evidence disappears. And of course, you were younger at that point as well. And judges don't generally feel comfortable going back that far. Not impossible, but and maybe the reason why you have to do it is because your date last insured may have expired in 2018 or something. So you have to go back that far. Realize if you just applied, of course, again, your insured status is going to be a big part of this, but you only get paid 1 year prior to the date of application. So, let's say scenario would be your date last insured was 2018. You apply in 2026. You're trying to prove your disability began in 2016. And you're successful, you only get paid going back to 2025. You can't go back that far to get paid. But you could find that your disability began within your date last insured. That would obviously benefit you for SSDI purposes. You would need really strong evidence, is my take.
It's hard because you can't create the evidence now by going to the doctor now. You still have to go to the doctor now, but you can't.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If let's say you were to depose the doctor, how many doctors are going to really remember the way you were 10 years ago? It's just really hard to do that. And let's say you go to the doctor and say, complete a functional capacity form for me as of the way I was in 2016. I mean, that's hard. That's a hard thing to do.
I did have a case. This went to hearing maybe like 3 weeks ago. It's an old onset date, and the treating doctor now. We do have the records from back then. It was like a workers' comp doctor, and workers' comp doctors have to say certain things that you kind of wish they didn't say. And he did do a retrospective. He's still treating, and he did do a retrospective statement, talking about things out like in a different way than the workers' comp medical records showed. What just fingers crossed that it helps. It was very kind of him, actually. That's rare, and particularly for a workers' comp. Sometimes I feel like they're kind of restricted from a lot of things. So anyway, we'll see. We don't have the results yet. So.
That is quite rare. All right, we got about 10 minutes to go, so we'll kind of zoom through a couple of these. I get Social Security statement. I'm 61 and anticipate needing to apply by the end of the year. At 64, I'd get over 1,000 if I wait. Well, again, the question of when to apply for retirement. If you apply for early retirement and disability at the same time and you win disability, they bump up your retirement to full retirement. If you lose disability, which again, at 61 is you have a real advantage. But if you lose, you're stuck. You're grandfathered in at the lower early retirement figure. So that's a judgment call. Okay, what is the chances of disability with full support of a rheumatologist? It will help, but again, what does full support mean? All right, let's see here. They look at decline in earnings. That's a good question. Do you think that the judges look at the earnings record and see kind of a decline in terms of, the rate of compensation?
Yeah, and sometimes it's because they were taking time off and the unpaid days and stuff like that. Yeah, it's something that if it's kind of really obvious, I think they definitely see it. And I don't think there's a problem pointing it out in your brief either.
I was going to say, I think as your attorney should point that out. Don't assume the judge is going to draw conclusions. Your attorney is going to have to draw those conclusions. So the evidence may be there. Some judges will make the deduction, make the leap, but it's better for you to tell them, why this is significant. That's why you have an attorney. This is why this is significant.
Point it out.
Yeah. Okay. KU Thunder is here pretty regularly. Do all the judges get reviewed? Remands, reversal, plain? I don't know. They should. I mean, I know that Social Security can be pretty aggressive going after judges with high approval rates.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're quite so aggressive going after ones with low approval rates. I suspect there's some internal, metrics for judges, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, I would have to imagine that second question. Do remands or reversals play a factor in any? I would have to imagine that that's a slap in the face. It's a
Yeah.
real,
But have you ever seen a judge removed because of too many denials? I haven't.
no. I think there was a judge that we had that was removed for too
Too many
many
approvals.
awards.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was
There was one
unfortunate.
judge I knew that was he was moonlighting doing something else. He was a judge by day and he was doing some other job, in the federal government, at the same time, and he was double dipping, and they caught him, and he got fired. So, and
Wow.
he was a nice guy personally, but a very low approval rate. So I wasn't. In fact, the funny thing is,
Oh,
he
you were
reached,
glad he was gone. Yeah.
yeah, no, he reached out to me. He's like, do you handle, appeals of wrongful terminations of ALJs? I'm like, no. I was
Not
going to
yours.
say, and I'm not really all that unhappy to see you go, but I didn't say that. I just like, well, I wish you the best in all your future endeavors. Don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out.
That's right.
But,
Get a different day job.
yes, that's right. Cynthia, one of my clients, hello. Okay. We got 5 more minutes. Got left-sided weakness, carpal tunnel, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's, anxiety, getting worried. I think, what is your firm diagnosis, and what are the functional issues that the doctors say arise from it? And do you have the support, and how old are you? All right. Well, DDS makes so many errors in recon, such as listing obesity, size 3 or 4. Yeah, you're probably not obese. My attorney says it's a strong case. And obesity, it's based on your height and your weight. I don't know if it's based on your dress size, but
It's no longer a listing either.
that's right.
It's been a listing in a long time.
Be
Years and years it's been gone.
Yeah, it's got to be considered, certainly in terms of orthopedic issues, but body mass. Because I have some clients who are, pushing 400 pounds, and one of the arguments that George Piemonte has made, and I've adopted now, is that if you need a special chair, that's an accommodation. And so, if you are, if you can prove that you need a special chair to perform work, that's something that an employer would have to make an accommodation for. Therefore, that would preclude, work.
It should.
It
How are
should.
you finding them taking that? How have you found that
Yeah,
that job is knocked out?
I've never had a decision issued based on that, but I've put it in my argument a couple of times, and I've asked some VEs, and they tend to not. Well, I don't know. I really, I wouldn't know about that. How many of them would consider that? I'm thinking, well, if you have to have a special chair, it's like having a special screen that you can't see. But so I haven't really had a decision based on that issue alone. But
I wonder if the fact that you throw the argument in there,
yeah,
the judge knows it's a legitimate argument, because if they need an accommodation, it's not competitive work.
I
right?
agree.
It's outside of the
Right.
Substantial numbers game.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the point, is, if you could work, but it's got to be accommodated, where they've got to, get you a recliner so you could sit in a recliner, keep your legs extended. And they've got to spend money on a special monitor, and they're going to spend them in a special chair. That's an accommodation. That is not competitive work. And for disability, they have to prove at step 5 of the sequential process that there are jobs that exist in the economy that are not accommodated. So
that's right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We get time for a couple more here. Does everybody have to appear before a judge? No. Judges can sometimes issue a decision on the record. So
you also have the option, when you appeal for a hearing, you could say, I don't want to attend the hearing.
Yeah.
I just want you to decide it on the
I wouldn't do that, but you can.
I don't recommend that either at all.
Christina, one of my regulars, hello from California. Hello, Christina. Okay. How long do you have to speak to the judge before your attorney? I mean, every judge has got their own way of doing things. Most of the time, the judge will ask the attorney for an opening, although probably about 25% of the time they don't. And they'll ask you questions, or your attorney will ask you questions. You'll do most of the talking. They don't want to hear from your attorney. They want to hear from you. So it's not like your attorney's intervening. Your attorney's going to be asking questions so you can, bring out the evidence. Really, your testimony is evidence. So, Okay. All right. A couple more. We filed. Okay. So Steve is an initial. We filed about 3 weeks ago. The case has to be assigned to a claims examiner. That can take 3, 5, 7 weeks. It just depends on how busy they are. But normally it'll take 4 to 6 weeks. I'm guessing it just depends on the
Oh,
district
it's
where it's
crazy.
at. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's see if there's any. Let's see here. Okay, let's do two more, then we will call it a night. Are benefits continued during a CDF for major depressive? If you ask that if they move to terminate you, you can file a form. It's got to be done within 10 days of the notice of termination to have benefits continue while you appeal. But you have to file that form within 10 days, which is absurd, but that's what they say.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Um, let's see here. Okay. Lawrence says, my lawyer just told me my previous ALJ is out because of a medical problem. Now his boss is reviewing my case, requesting more from DDS. She's out of Atlanta. Should I worry about this with her taking over? It's just that's going to be, it depends. I mean, if you had a 75% approval judge and now somebody else is looking at it, that's not a good thing. If you had a 20% approval judge and now you've got a more reasonable judge, that's a good thing. So it just is going to depend on the evidence really and who the parties are. I remember back in the day when we had live hearings. Actually, I had this happen to me with a phone hearing. I was assigned a judge. I think it was out of Atlanta, notorious for like 15, 17% approval rate. And I get to the hearing, or we get called for the hearing. Oh, Judge so and so is not here anymore, or is not available. We gave your case to Judge XYZ, who's got a much higher approval. I'm like, no problem. Let's go for it. So that can happen too. So that's a good thing. All right. We are at 2 hours, so I think we'll go ahead. And I know there's some more questions, and we could go on talking all night, but we both need to get some sleep. So, any final closing thoughts you have for the folks who are, I would say is you just have to just be patient, keep appealing, and realize it's a very inefficient system. But we got to play their game. Any thoughts you've got about Social Security in general, other than play the game?
No, but I always drill home the mantra about keep an eye on your DLI, because if you have to do repeat, if there's some way you can keep that DLI pushed out, there's some sort of very mild part-time work each year where you gain the credits to help, hopefully all 4 credits, but even if it's 2, depending on what you need, 4 is definitely going to do it for you. Because it breaks my heart, these remote DLIs, because you have a hard time getting a lawyer. Like you were saying, because it cuts down your chances of prevailing so much, and you can't take the lawyer's advice about how to build evidence because none of the new evidence is going to count for the initial question. So if you can in any way prevent that and keep your DLI going forward until you clinch your case.
And just to give you an idea, to get all 4 credits, I think it's in 26, it's maybe $8,000.
I think it might be a hair more. I'm not sure. And it depends if you're self-employed, you have to have more because there's that one deduction. I always tell people go for 9,000 just to be safe.
Yeah. Okay. So you could do that, and that would be less than SGA. And
again, yes, it's way less.
But you as you point out, you could theoretically get 4 credits pretty easily. $9,000 is not a ton of money, but it would give you all 4 credits. And if you were missing some credits and you did it for a couple of years, it could make a huge difference in your case.
It's big.
Yeah, you got to know what you can do, and then you got to be able to answer the question: is that all you could do? But I think that's good advice. So we'll leave it there. So everybody, thank you all for tuning in. I expect to be here next week, unless I'm in the maternity ward. But hopefully that will be coming soon. But I'll post it out there. I should be here next week. Even if the babies comes, I'm not going to be there at 10 o'clock at night. So anyway, I'll expect to see everybody here next week. and we will hopefully everybody has a good weekend, nice weather, stay safe. Steph, as always, thank you very much for joining me. Hang
My
on.
pleasure.
Yep. And of course, we'll do it again soon. So everybody, y'all take care, and we will see you next week.
Bye, everybody.